And amen. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to bypass talking about all the food we ate at Thanksgiving. You know, that's what pastors do at times, or speakers. I do want to point your attention to how busy traffic gets during the holiday season. I don't mean just on the road, I mean in the aisles at the stores. Talking about mental illness, you know, that's just crazy. Isn't it how intense it is? I made the mistake of going to a local store on Black Friday later in the day. People are revving up emotionally and physically to get what they want and to get out of there. And do you know what happens when we kind of rev like that? Our mind revs up too. Did you know that? It's not just your body or not just your feelings, your whole brain revs up. And so I want to invite you to mentally sort of pull over in the slow lane now while we spend just a little bit of time together. And let that mind, let the accelerator come off. Even it takes, if a person's emotional system, mental system is really revved up, it can take up to 12 hours to calm. So if someone is having road rage, telling them to stop it is not going to work. The brain can't do that. It can't shift that quick. It would be nice if it would, right, for the rest of us. So allowing your mind to slow down, and one practice that may be of help to you is just to sort of, Pastor Fred had you doing some breathing, and that's a really great exercise. It might be good just to invite God to help you today, and invite Him to help me as well. I mean, I need the same help you need. And just that our minds could be attentive and open to Him. The things that you will hear, some things you may readily agree with, some things you may not be so sure about, and you can just sort of hold them and go ask God about them. I'm sure not beyond messing up along the way. So letting God kind of have His space with us. Now let me ask you to think about a time when you felt unqualified for a task. Can you kind of flip back through your mind? It may even be as recent as the last week or the last month. But can you think of a time when you were asked to do something, you were required at work to do something, and you're going like, that's above my pay grade? Just think for a minute. I'm going to give you two examples that I've had. One was in 1980, when I got married to a lady named Terry Hall. Now, I am trained in relationships, and I am trained in a lot of things. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. Right? Would you agree with me? There's a big difference between knowing something and living it. I know to love my wife. I'm just not good at it. You understand the difference between the knowledge and getting it into the life? Boy, what a big difference. Because if knowing it would fix you, wouldn't it be a different world? You just go, oh, I know that's true. Now I'm living totally different. Well, when I first married, I was not qualified to know what to do, nor should you be. Especially if it is a first marriage. I didn't know what pantyhose hanging in the shower were supposed to look like. What prepares a guy for that? You know? And doesn't she know which way to roll the toilet paper? I mean, we have a Carlislean way of doing that in my house, you know? And you never run the water when you're brushing your teeth, don't you know that? Or the other way, right? The other time that I didn't feel real qualified was when I had kids, and I shouldn't feel qualified then either. It's really cool when you're in the hospital and the nurse is there. Anybody remember taking them home? I mean, the first one. The second one, you know, you just kind of drag them by the leg. They're okay. Yeah, it's like a kid. First kid, when you take them home, we kept wanting to hit the emergency nurse button. We didn't have one at home. I didn't feel qualified. As a matter of fact, a good mental health concept is knowing you're not qualified to do life on your own. God did not design you to do life without Him and some others. Agree? Not that that means relationships are simple or relationships are easy, but even the neuroscience aspect of psychology today will tell you that your brain is a social organ. Almost like God knew what He was doing at the beginning, nearly. You're designed to be in relationships with others. So I'm telling you unqualified because I don't feel real qualified to present this message to you today because it's not talked about much. I mean, I never heard it talked about growing up as far as my history in church. I think we talk about it a little more. I think there's advertising about it. But this idea of Christians and mental illness for many of us is so challenging. I mean, we no longer struggle with Christians and physical illness, do we? Nope, we don't. No, we know people have physical problems. This one's much more thorny and challenging. So I ask you to sort of step into this adventure with me. I don't know if you need a deep breath, but I do. So I'm going to take one of those. And we're going to look at how Christianity and mental health overlap in our world today. So what is it? That's one of the questions we're going to ask. What is mental illness? We're going to look at a psychological definition of that. And another thing we're going to look at is, do Christians have mental illness? Then we're going to look at a foundational concept that's consistent with Christianity and with psychology about what mental health and spiritual health looks like. So those three ideas are my assignment. So what is mental illness? I'd ask you to think first about mental health would be, in the psychological community, you functioning at a very high level in your thinking and your feeling and your relationships. That's what they would say, something like that. You'll see that in a minute. Let's think about illness from a physical perspective. Anybody blessed with the flu this year? Yeah, I mean, how fun is that? Rope burn fun, right? No fun at all. Yeah. And you know that there are lower levels of the flu that you kind of function, but nobody wants to be around you because they're afraid they're going to get it. And there's sort of this medium ground where you kind of don't want to go to work, don't think you can, but you try anyway. Then there's this full-blown experience of the flu where you're on your back in the bed begging for God to deliver you from this, right? It's like all along that continuum. Well, mental illness is similar to that. It has like entry-level symptoms, medium level, high level. And the challenging part, and let me just tell you this up front, about talking about mental illness is there's this natural barrier to talking about this because I think it feels shameful. Does that connect at all? Like I shouldn't be depressed, I shouldn't be anxious, I shouldn't be obsessing, I shouldn't be relating in an angry way, whatever it is. I should be over all those past pains. We have a lot of that out there. And do you know why we feel shame, I think? Because shame means two things. It means we're human. And you know what human and shame means? You're not God. You're less than God. There's a legitimate shame that says, I'm just not big as God. The other component of shame makes us feel vulnerable. It's the V word. I mean, who wants to feel vulnerable? You're designed, like I said earlier, for connection. You're designed for safety. You're designed for deep intimacy. Yet, because we've been hurt, who wants to get close again? Who wants to give that thing a shot? I grew up in the South, and we would have these semi-rodeo games on the weekends. And there were these crazy things that they would have us do, like pole bending or riding around barrels, or your girlfriend picking you up at 150 miles an hour on her horse, and you're supposed to jump on somehow. And it's just bizarre, intense stuff. And you feel vulnerable if you're not willing to step into that. It wouldn't have been smart for me just to say to my girlfriend, her name was Sharon, I don't think I'm going to let you run over me with your horse today. No, it wouldn't have just been smarter. Be vulnerable, be honest. I don't think the quarter horse that weighs about a ton should run over me today. Vulnerability, when we feel it, we rarely say it. Do you know what we do? We push back. Vulnerability will create aloneness, is what it will do, and distance. Or you can go the other way and sort of blame and all that. So all of that fits under this whole idea of mental illness. And by the way, medical science is very young, meaning maybe a couple hundred years. I wouldn't even argue it back that far. We didn't have antibiotics till the 1940s. Did you know that? Everybody before that, I don't know what you did. Castor oil would have been my grandmother's answer to that, which is a horrible thing to do to somebody, but that's what we took. Yeah, so 1950s, there was the first introduction to an antidepressant, even though they're all over the news today. Anti-anxiety didn't come along until like 1960. So it's a very young field. The study and experience of the brain is even younger. It's like 1990. We know more now than we've ever known, and we still can't figure out the complexity of the brain that God made. Remember, if you've been in church forever, you may have heard this verse. If you haven't, this is a verse in Psalms. It says, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully and wonderfully. It also says that we were crowned with honor and glory. I mean, the significance of what's in your head, we're talking over 1 trillion connections in your head. I mean, I've wired up a ceiling fan before, and that's about 4 wires. Not complex. I work good at that level. But can you imagine in your brain, that brain that's about 75% water has this electrical chemical firing going on, and of course can misfire. Let's start with this definition. This is from the American Psychiatric Association. And they would say this: mental illness is and the first couple of words, health or medical condition. Now, what they're describing is not you having a little discouragement after all the Thanksgiving activities. They're not describing a couple of hours of the blues. When they're talking about a condition, they're talking about something that lasts a week or 2 weeks and the intensity is pretty high. So this health medical condition, it involves changes in emotions, that's the feeling component, thinking and behavior. Rarely do you just have an emotional problem or just a cognitive problem or just a behavioral problem. And the reason is a little bit of infant psychology. Children are not born with their thinking brain working. It's there, it's just unplugged. My wife tells me that about my adult brain sometimes. Where would he just plug that thing in? That would be nice. And they have an emotional brain that they live with us in an experience of us for about 2.5 years, and then the thinking brain comes online. So your emotional and body memories are much deeper than your thinking. Matter of fact, when thinking comes online, it helps us not feel sometimes if it's a bad family environment. It sort of works against us. Here's the other component that deals with distress. By the way, distress is, there's a healthy stress called eustress that's fun and exciting, and it's a new job, and I can't believe it's going to be so great, and in 6 months, it's a stressful job, and you're going like, oh, I don't like that job. Well, distress begins to push the envelope. It means painful. It means hurting. It means a type of suffering. And people will begin to have problems socially that would be like friendships, church, at work, or family. You have different aspects of your life. And what mental illness does is begin to impact more and more and more areas of your life. It will impact your family life. It will impact your friendship life. It will impact your church life in its more intense forms. So when someone is having a problem in only one arena, that does not mean it's not a lower level mental illness. It means it's probably not what these guys and gals are talking about. Different dimensions of your life. That would be one way we would diagnose it. And when it comes to the health and medical, we're now able to get pictures of the brain. This brain is depressed. What we know is going on in the brain when a person's depressed is not near as much electrical charge, chemical firing. Just not happening. The brain on the other side is lit up with the energy of the Energizer Bunny, right? Like lights everywhere. So in the depressed brain, we know that there's this chemical, electrical thing going on, and if a person's having that difficulty, the ability to go, I'm not going to feel that, is just not possible. It's in the brain. Now, you're going to have to catch them a lot earlier than that to say, just stop that. So this is when they talk about mental illness. This may be an example of that. Another one is on the other end of the spectrum with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is the PTSD brain. This is the normal. What you notice with this one, because anxiety gets your emotions up, depression gets them down, this one's firing everywhere. This is a calm, relaxed brain. I don't know much about that brain, but it looks like a cool brain to have. I'm much more on the anxious side, and if you can't do that long enough, why not get depressed? Experience both ends of it. And by the way, today, clinically we know that if you have one, you're probably going to have a little bit of the other. So if you're just experiencing anxiety, and it gets pretty intense, like what they might call a mental illness, that depression will come along just to partner you in the process. They are twins in that sense. One thing I would like you to know is that no longer is this a diagnosis for just military personnel or vets or people that work at the fire department or the police department or EMTs. And by the way, your pastors are susceptible to this, and you are too some. If you're around people who have had a trauma experience and they tell you the story of it, guess what? It velcros to you. Unless you just don't listen to them. That's one way to avoid it, just don't listen, right? But if you have empathy toward them, it helps them heal, but it also gets stuck somewhat to you. We call it secondary trauma. Can you imagine in the developing child, a little kid who doesn't have the skill set yet to fend off, stuff from other people? Their brain is very, very, very vulnerable. We know that now. The whole parenting idea has shifted from the 50s to we're not sure what it's going to be yet, but it's kind of in the oven cooking right now. But a little one can be scared really easily. For example, I am a grandfather of 2 and one that's supposed to be here in the spring. I mentioned in the other, in the other group that I wish somebody would write a book about how to age gracefully. I wish somebody would write a book about how to be a grandparent. Because you don't know, right? You just get one of those little rascals, glad you can send them home. Why have I forgotten that at 1 year old, everything is an adventure and you have to touch it or stick it in your face? Everything. Now, you're going to lick the dog bowl, eat the dog food. It doesn't matter. We're going to get it all. So my house, we're going around trying to keep it organized. And you know what I realized about my grandson, especially the younger one, his name, we call him Allie. You can scare him real easy. If you're going to scare me, I do have a startle reflex because of sort of my history, but if you're going to scare me, you're going to have to really work at it today, but you can scare him easy. As a matter of fact, you can scare him so bad, he'll throw stuff up in the air. It's kind of funny. But I'm not saying I ever did that. Often. Well, yeah, you can pretty much frighten them. And it doesn't take near as much when they interpret it as fearful for them to even get their own little version of this. Doesn't take much. Anything that's too loud for them, anything that threatens them. So even children that have had difficulties can have this. Here's a way to think about mental illness. One way to think about it is when in these different areas of your life, in each of them, it becomes too much to manage. That's not a weakness, that's because you're human. Have you ever heard God described as like He's omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, that He's all-knowing, omniscient, and all that? If you know that about God, you know you're omnideficient. You don't have that. You can't be everywhere at the same time. I know some of you are going, yeah, I can. Well, yeah. I mean, not really, though. We are not who He is, and life can get too much and should while you're figuring it out, especially in our culture today. Like you need help, get on the web. Now, I'm a pro-web guy. I mean, I kind of really like the researching and all on that. But you can get too much information wherever it comes from and overload yourself. So when the family becomes too much and the work becomes too much and the friendships become too much and you start having that begins to move a person to such a stressed state that they may need to have help. Think about the holidays when you see this next slide. I saw a little bit of this that day that I shouldn't have gone to the store, but I went anyway after Thanksgiving. Do you think at my age you'd figure that out, right? People are carrying way too much, going way too fast, and are frustrated that the 2-year-old will not run with them through the store. And that's that too much feeling. And if that's not enough, whoa, that's like you got too much in all areas of your life. Now, I'll say this, since I've been in both of those places emotionally, with my own mental, emotional life, don't you wish it was just in 5 minutes throw off all the boxes and you're fine? It rarely works like that. If it does, good for you. But to get to this level, you have to have practiced loading up. And I did. I was good at it. Load. And you know what you don't do? Don't offload. Just keep loading. Like when you have a baby, offload something. That's that's a free piece of advice for you. When you get married, do what the Old Testament people did. We don't have the money to do this, but they used to give them a year off. Now we know why. We get that. I mean, that's not going to make sense. How do you figure all this out? You add that complexity into a full life. We earn a burnout, at that point. But we're learning, right? Nobody wants to have one of those. Only if you've never had one do you think that's a piece of cake. Overloaded, too much stress, and what you end up with is somewhat of a crash at times. So let me show you if I can example this for you. If you've ever been to the hospital and they ask you how much are you hurting, this is where everybody wants to be. I'm not hurting. I don't even know what I'm doing here in the hospital. Paul just made that up. I'm good. But if you're at a number 10, isn't that about what a 10 is? I'm crying and I'm hurting and gosh, this really doesn't feel good. And if you're having an appendix attack, they leave you in this state long enough to diagnose it. They won't give you medication till they're sure that it's your appendix that blew up into 20 pieces. Now, let me show you what mental illness or what is not really considered a mental illness. If you are here, and in an hour you go here, and then in an hour you're back here, you're probably not having a mental illness. See, what happens with a mental illness is we go from here to here, and then we get stuck here. That's why it's good to ask people, if you're trying to help one of us who is recovering or dealing with mental illness, it's really good to ask us, where are you on a 1 to 10? That may give you some information about us. Most of the time, you'll see it more like this. I'm doing okay. I'm not doing very well. And it's horrible. By the time it gets here, you're probably in need of a lot of help, especially if you stay there. See, one of the mental illness characteristics is a person stays there. If you've ever been in any type of tragedy, near tragedy, car wreck, something of that sort, remember how your heart feels? We'll say it gets up in our throat and it's beating out of our chest and all that. That's one thing to do that for an hour. It's another thing to do that for 2 weeks. So when you're thinking about at what level a person could be at, that may be a way to think about it. Also, the second thing I want to deal with is, what about Christians and mental illness? And I'm just going to say this really quiet. Yes, we have mental illness. So nobody will hear me. Let me example this. I'm going to probably overwhelm you with scripture, but I'll give you a number of characters who deal with what look like characteristics of mental illness. There's a guy named J.P. Moreland, who is a Christian philosopher who crashed and was willing to be vulnerable enough to write about it so the rest of us could understand if we have something like that. And he's going to talk about his thoughts and his feelings and behavior. Listen to what he says. This is an author and a speaker, real solid Christian guy. For 7 months, remember the 7 months, I experienced daily panic attacks and felt intense anxiety except when sleeping. That's the emotional component. Insomnia usually means anxiety. Sleeping too much and not feeling better is usually depression if you're wanting to help somebody or if you need that for yourself. I could not see the world as it really was. For instance, if a circus lost a lion right up the street and we hear that the lion is in our building, you have every right to freak out. And should. But if all you see of a lion is me holding a 3-inch stuffed cat and you're freaking out, that's distorted thinking, right? We make the mouse or the little cat the lion. So he's got this distorted thinking. He said the first few months I would just lie on the couch because I didn't have energy. That's kind of the physical component. I was afraid of irrational things. That has to do with the cat and the lion. I was in fear every time that I heard the phone ring. He couldn't even take a phone call. I could not drive on the freeway. I couldn't go to my grandchildren's games. And I couldn't even have them in my home. I wanted to be alone. That's another feature, the isolation. I wanted to be alone. And he said, listen to this part, so I could worry about everything. Well, one man in the present who's had that experience. Here is a guy named Elijah. This guy's in the Old Testament. He had this awesome victory over hundreds of people. He is a really, my 70s language would say, a really bad dude. He loved God. He stood up to all those false prophets. Great victory. And then we read this about him. He was afraid. Guess what he was afraid of? The king's wife threatened him. Now, if you had just had victory over hundreds, why would you be afraid? Unless the lady's name was Jezebel, if that means something to you, it really should. She's a scary lady. So here's what he does. He runs for his life. Yeah. He didn't fight. He'd already had a fight. So he runs for his life. He literally, that emotional part of the brain that gets that fight flight going, man, he's not in his rational mind. He is out of here. Look what happens. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush. I didn't even look that up for you. I have no idea what it is, but it would probably sweep somebody off their feet. That was free. Sat down under it and prayed that he might what? Die. And then he says this, I have had enough. That's a great mental health statement, right? I have had enough. It's really okay to say that because you probably have. Remember the donkey lifted up in the air? When you have that much on you, you qualify to go, I've had enough. It's okay. As a matter of fact, you won't get help if you don't know you've had enough. He's saying it. He's a very strong character. I have had enough. He says, he gets quasi-suicidal. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Elijah, this great man of God. David the psalmist, also the David that killed Goliath, if you're not as familiar with the Bible. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? That's like an honest prayer, isn't it? Okay, God, like whenever you could show up, that would be awesome. Just come down here and do the cool Jesus stuff. How long? Then he says, must I wrestle with my thoughts? So maybe you're not the only one wrestling with your thoughts. Maybe you're not the only one that can just tell them no when they go away. He's wrestling with them. Day after day, I have sorrow in my heart. The Psalms were like their song book. For you that remember the day of hymnals, these would have been written and the people would have sang them. Some very upbeat and celebratory. Others, boy, would just be kind of down in the dumps. So that's David. Here's a guy named Moses. I call him Mo because I grew up with the Three Stooges, and that's probably why I have mental health issues right now. If you know what that was. It was all this stuff, that would get you in trouble. Moses is complaining to God as well. By the way, when you're in your worst shape, it's the best time to talk to God. I mean, he's not like any human. Like, he is not overwhelmed by your stuff. You ever been talking to somebody about your problems and they're just gradually sinking down? You're going like, I'm destroying them. It's too much for them, not God. He's complaining that he can't take care of these people. 1 million or so out in the wilderness with no McDonald's. How painful is that? I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy. That's that same language that it's too much. Go ahead and kill me. We've got this kill thing going on. Now, if you're in that place, you're really hurting. Here's my opinion about suicide. I believe majority of the people who attempt or think about suicide are wanting relief long before they do the act. That's my opinion. Are there exceptions to that? You're probably right. There probably are. But if you get your hand stuck on a red-hot eyelet on a stove, metaphorically, and you can't get it off, it may make sense to you. Why day after day after day you can't stop that pain. That's why I say get help. Do what people have always done. Get help. Well, he wants to die. Here's Jonah, a guy I've not heard us speak about here. He had this horrible job, he thought, of preaching to people that when they responded to God, he got mad at God. It's an interesting thing. And he wants to die in what looks like a positive situation. And here's the guy who wrote most of the New Testament, Paul. And he's saying to the church at Corinth, therefore called Corinthians at Corinth, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in Asia. Can I just point out a weird thing? This Paul guy that really loves God, that's really done a lot of cool things, is going to tell people he's got problems. I hope that's good for somebody. Can I tell you what I learned to do with my problems? Hide them at all cost. Do you know why? You don't always get responded to when you tell people your problems. There's not always a good response, right? I mean, I would be taught by my family, don't bother them. I don't know if you grew up with that one. Don't bother people with your stuff. Sometimes it's good to bother. So here's a guy that's going to tell them about his troubles. Look how he describes it. Great pressure, beyond our ability to endure, and we despaired. That's a really emotionally kind of pregnant word, like hopeless and helpless. Now, if Paul can be there and Elijah can be there and David, I'm just going to assume we all can hit some really stressful times that may lead to a mental health issue. So I'm giving a yes check mark to we can have those problems. If we can, let me give you just, these need to be elaborated on, but I'm just going to give you some basics. My opinion, meds at some point along that 1 to 10 are going to be really good and okay, especially if you can't turn it around. Here's what I do. If you think you are moving into a mental, emotional difficulty, a dry period where it's just really challenging and it's hurting, always, like in any area of your life, ask God's help. Don't you think that's a good thing to do? Just go, here I am. You know, I've got an emotional flat tire in my life. I don't know what to do with it. And if God does not fix you, assume He's got another way to fix you. Just assume. Assume that there is another way. As a matter of fact, going through, you actually get discipled in another way. A different way. So, yes, we have meds for everything in the world. You would find out if you explored psychotropic meds that they are not as specific in their application as antibiotics. You could learn all those things. But there comes a point, just a personal experience, when I am helping people, if you can't think a little bit with me, we can't progress. And sometimes meds help you stabilize enough to think, much less parent and all those other areas of your life. Also, counseling is good. I know you're going to have to ask, what's the best counselor? How do they go about it? I know there are tons of questions, and I have told the pastors I'm available to try to help if you're trying to figure out some of that, what you're looking for. And I'd also say support is good. It's real necessary. The New Testament word that stands out for support is the word refresh. Paul would say to somebody else, you refreshed me. That means you breathed new life into me. That means Paul needed that at that point. We need others around us. Don't let the shame or the past pain block you from getting that help. The next and last question that I'm wanting to answer is, what is the foundation for mental health? And I'm going to give you something that is spiritual, relational, emotional, and mental. Think of foundation this way. If you've ever built a home or you've seen a home built, they're going to throw something like this down first, unless you're in Carolina and they're going to do pier and beam, if you know what that is, or they're going to do basements around this area, but they're going to have a foundation. Everything is going to be laid on that, good or bad. You remember, for you that are familiar a little bit with the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus would talk about a house built on the sand, a house built on the rock. That's a foundation type idea. And here's what I think the foundation is for mental, emotional, spiritual health. I think it's love But that word, gosh, I love the Chiefs, and I love hot dogs, and I love my wife. That word has such a broad meaning. In biblical language, you'd have multiple words so that you would know that loving your wife's a little different than loving hot dogs. But we don't have that necessarily in our language. So we're also told this, that we are to love God, others, and the self. Now, if you're an infant, like I see some of you with little ones, they don't do it that way. They learn to be loved, to love themselves, to love others, and then love God, right? You ever had a theological dialogue with a 1-year-old? This is a complex thing. They're babbling. I mean, that could be tongues, right? I don't know. But it's just a complex thing. So with them, it's the opposite way. And here's a passage in a book, if you've been here for the last several messages with Pastor Fred talking about grace. Galatians is a book. It's literally a place called Galatia, a geographic place. And Paul had established a church there, and they began to leave his teachings of grace and trusting Jesus by faith for Jewish law. So he's correcting them. And here's one of the things he tells them. He's been talking about the law, circumcision specifically. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. It's sort of like he's going, okay, if there's going to be a command and you need one, here it is. Love your neighbor as what? Yeah. What? Self-love feels wrong when I say it, spiritually. I'm giving my history. If you know what my history is like growing up in really churches similar to Pastor Fred. Love yourself. But here's what he says, love your neighbor, and it looks like he's assuming it's out of the same way you would love yourself. So loving others well looks like it depends on you being loved well. So God loving you, you accepting that, and loving yourself that way, and then loving others, loving God. Let me share this with you. If you're afraid you're going to be selfish, right? Love yourself in a selfish way. Read the Gospels. Watch how Jesus loved people and love yourself that way. It'll never be wrong. Love yourself the way he loved people. And you'll never get you into selfishness. The assumption is you've got to be loved well to love. That's why it's critical for the little ones to get it. And if they don't get it because of whatever the parenting environment is, you may be like me and you're having to learn to do that more in your adult life, still you're designed for that. Jesus does a similar teaching to this. I want to suggest using the idea of compassion for yourself or self-compassion. Love kind of gets murky. It's a good word. It's really got a lot of good meaning. But self-compassion is a little bit more workable for me. Compassion meaning, if you have compassion for me, you would see my situation. You would have this empathy, sympathy for me, and you would have a desire to alleviate my pain and suffering. That would be compassion. When Jesus says it this way, he saw the people, they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he had compassion for them. So we're not talking just about compassion for others. We're talking about having that type compassion for ourself. Here's a practical piece to this. What if you were to treat yourself the way you would one of your best friends when they were in a difficult place? Say your friend's having relationship problems, car problems, work problems, just a list of them. How would you treat them? Now, some of you may not know exactly how to treat them and stay away. Some of you may try to engage them. It'd be people do it different ways in this audience. But a good thing to do would be kind to them and gracious to them. You can't take it all on, but you can be sensitive and connected to them and support them during that difficult time. You can say things like, wow, that's really hard, that's really difficult, I'm sorry. You can even say, can I help? And that doesn't mean you take on their house payment for 6 years, right? Well, maybe you can. I couldn't. So, bless you if you can. That'd be great. So what would it be like to treat yourself like you would a good friend? Like when you're having a difficulty, what would it be like to go, wow, this is really difficult? Now, do you know what I used to tell myself? Suck it up. Like you got this education in Jesus stuff, like quit crying about it. Get over that. You realize that kind of talk doesn't help anybody, even when you talk to yourself that way? Some of you are going like, I talk to myself? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you do. Even you quiet people, I know you're talking to yourself in your head. Don't let that bother you. But everybody's got this dialogue. That's how we function as humans. So, here are 3 aspects of compassion. And I'm going to give you a little exercise real fast, the clock tells me. 3 components. What if you were to forgive yourself? Think about mercy. Mercy is what you give and extend to an enemy. Did you know sometimes you can be an enemy to yourself? You can get in your own way. What would it be like to forgive you? What would it be like to, number 2, accept yourself? Think of welcoming yourself. If you were to come to my house on the front porch in Liberty, there's this big front porch pad, and guess what it has on it? Welcome. Yeah. My wife actually welcomes people. When I've had a whole day of interacting and I'm exhausted and done, I'm not really wanting to welcome people. You know what I'm saying? Some of us are a little bit introverted. We're going like, that was enough. I related for an hour. That's about all I've got, for today. The extroverts are going, let's do it all our life. Well, she's welcoming, and that's what we should be doing. We should put out the pad for ourselves. Oh, I welcome myself. You know what welcoming includes? Enjoying somebody. I know we endure a lot of people, right? And we smile about it like it's okay. But we endure. What would it be like to enjoy you? Because God does. Do you understand that you would have more resources if you were compassionate with yourself? You'd have more capacity for compassion with other people. Here's the last one. What if you were to care for yourself? And I think about tending yourself. I think of a shepherd and sheep. I don't know if you've figured this out yet, but humans have limits. You really do need to sleep. Even if you don't know it, we think you do. You know what happens when people don't sleep? Grumpy, agitated. If they don't eat enough, or if they eat too much, or if they don't give themselves replenishment cycles. I didn't know you were supposed to fill up your emotional mental tank. I just drove till the car crashed. Burn it out. I would just tell you don't do it. I've done it twice because you want to be sure it was really fun the first time, so go for round 2 on that thing. Yeah, caring for yourself. I don't have another self to help you with but this self. I'm not entrusted with 3 more. I have one. And this is the one, if I can tend it, I can extend care, love, servanthood, whatever, all the Christian stuff to. And I'd like you to hear me say that you are of such value to God that He wants you to get better, even if it's baby stepping. He really wants you to grow and to mature, and some of the growing and maturing is healing in that process. So, how do we change? You could take any of these 3 ideas. It's knowledge, and you can say, maybe I'm not so good at forgiving myself. What if I were to go and just hang out with God with that idea? Lord, I don't really know how to forgive myself. I don't think I should be forgiven. Or maybe it's more accepting. Or maybe it's caring for. Change starts with knowledge. Have any of you figured out yet knowledge doesn't fix you? alone. Like you have to participate. It's like having a football but not play, right? I got a football. Well, it's good. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. Just got it. What you do with your knowledge, I would be very intentional. What you hold before your mind, what you keep there. Take the sermons, take the ideas, take the Bible, and hold that before the mind. Here's the takeaway, and I'm done, because some of you look like I need to be done. Self-compassion strengthens mental, spiritual, and relational health. Hold that idea with you this week. What does self-compassion look like? Does that really what it means? Is he halfway right? Loving your neighbor as yourself. You'd find, guys, you would find this in Ephesians 5, that we're to love our wife like we love ourselves. I find that I must not love myself very well sometimes in that relationship. If you need help, or if you're not sure, please be willing to seek that out. That type of suffering and pain emotionally is very, very similar to physical experience. Those parts of the brain are very close. So let me pray over you. Lord, I thank you for these folks and the day and the time they've come and the holiday season. And Lord, it's not happy for everybody. Sometimes it reminds us of loss or childhood or other difficulties. So Lord, I pray that we would take a look at self-compassion, that we would see ourselves through the lens of your eyes, that we would hold those things before our mind. And Lord, these people